Hi, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. Today's episode is about gun reform. We'll be talking to a number of veterans. I do want to issue a warning that some parts of this podcast may be difficult to hear because they deal with war and other situations of gun violence. I also want to urge you to call your senators and representatives and ask them to pass stricter gun laws. You can reach your senators or congressional representative at 202-224-3121. Hey everybody, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I'm here as usual with my co-host Sophie. Hey Sophie.
Hey, Kelly.
And on the line with us today, we have two veterans I connected with through Twitter who are part of the Vets for Gun Reform. So we have Daniel Riley. Hello, Daniel.
Hey, how are you?
Great. And we have The Warax. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Maybe to start, you could each tell us a little bit about yourselves, what branch of the service you were in, what kind of combat you saw. Daniel, do you want to go first?
Sure. I was a Marine. I did combat tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. On my last deployment in Afghanistan, I ended up getting on the wrong side of a IED, an improvised explosive device, and lost both legs. So my military career was cut short very quickly. But, I spent just short of 6 years in the Marine Corps and medically retired now. But more almost sort of my backstory as well, when we talk about gun reform, especially as I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. I went to a high school, Columbine High School, of the infamous Columbine High School. I wasn't there for the shooting, but I was actually a freshman the year afterwards. So I started school there in August. The shooting was that previous April. And so both of those events, guns, and gun violence themselves, are a very personal part of my life. Both in the Marine Corps, obviously, I carried a rifle every day, used it in combat, and as well as I've seen what a community deals with after a tragedy and a massacre involving guns.
Like Daniel, I was a Marine, so my experience very similar to his. Served in the combat MOS. Deployed. My last deployment was to Afghanistan, and while I was there, I got I got blown up too. So that's what ended my career. And once I got out, I found myself sort of adrift, not really sure what I would be doing next, but just looking for something where I could continue to have an impact in the way that I thought that I did in the Marines. So I sort of fell into advocacy work in my real life. And this is kind of a side project of mine as the Warax is, I guess, become more than a side project now. So I was grateful to be able to fall in with guys like Daniel, guys and gals who have served and seen the horror that war has to offer. And those experiences, I think, motivate us to a high degree to make sure that people here don't need to see that and be exposed to it and be impacted by it. I know, speaking for myself, it's why I joined in the first place, was this idea where, we could go to war in order to protect people here from having to experience it. So I think that it makes sense to me to be involved in this movement for gun reform because this is the idea that there are children in schools who have seen the kind of things that Daniel and I have seen in war. In their classrooms, there's just no excuse for it. There's no reason for it. There's nothing that anybody can say to me that makes that okay. So that's what I'm doing here, and I think Daniel probably agree with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did either of you grow up at all with guns?
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I grew up in the Mid-Atlantic area. Had guns from a young age. My dad's NRA guy. Grew up shooting rifles, shooting pistols. So, I get it. Guns are very much a part of my life. And I don't, I think that guns can be used and enjoyed and kept safely, but that it is safety. It has to be done correctly. It has to be done with recognition. The weapons aren't fashion accessories, and that they're not toys.
I didn't grow up with guns really at all. My grandfather, when he passed away when I was younger, left his hunting rifle to my dad, so that was kind of in the house. But I wasn't really around guns a lot growing up. The first time I ever shot a gun was at boot camp. First time I had ever pulled the trigger was at boot camp. Obviously, the Marine Corps handled weapons a lot. Since then, I've been hunting. I've gone shooting with friends. Since that time, I've become more acclimatized to being around guns, and I've certainly, to this day, I mean, I'd go hunting. I like hunting. I enjoy hunting. Shooting guns is fun. I own a gun, but the difference between that and what Warax and the rest of us are kind of talking about is that I want to do it as responsibly as possible. And it's not that I don't like guns. It's that I respect guns and I respect the damage they can do, and that we're not, I mean, at least me, and I don't think anybody in this, in sort of this Vets for Gun Reform movement is saying, let's, get rid of all guns. The guns are bad, inherently bad. It's that they're terrible and impactful and powerful. So we have to treat them with the respect that they warrant. And that means, we need to make sure that the right people have them. There's certain weapons that just don't belong on the street. We're not saying don't have your guns, don't go hunting, don't go target shooting, don't go have fun with guns. But if you're going to do it, be responsible. And this country somehow has shifted so far to the end of being not responsible and in a lot of ways not respectful of the power that these guns have compared to the respect that we have seen firsthand that they warrant.
Are there a lot of vets joining in with the Vets for Gun Reform movement?
I think so. I've been pleased to see how many people have come forward to say just enough. Really, it's just one of the things that was interesting for me in the military was to recognize that a lot of the things that I think weren't views that were shared by people who I served with. I think I don't know that the military is predominantly conservative, but I know that conservatives in the military are much louder than people who have more liberal views. Mm-hmm. So very often it felt, very much like I was alone with what I was thinking. So, when I got out and I started to talk more about how I felt, I started to realize that, no, there really were a lot more people like me. You just don't realize how many of them there are. And it's been one of the really wonderful things about this movement is that it is connecting so many people who are on active duty right now or who have gotten out, yesterday or years ago, who say like, enough, this has to stop. And, this view, I don't know, I think that America has this image of veterans as, guys with beards and they're like riding ATVs and firing AR-15s into the air over their shoulders. And that's like, it's not us, that's not who we actually are. It doesn't represent the views of all veterans. It doesn't even represent a majority. It's like an image that people use to sell T-shirts. So it's really been wonderful to see how many people have come forward to say no to that image.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's disheartening a lot of times. You see that the image of the veteran is that conservative, grizzly, gun shooting, hunting kind of, redneck kind of guy. And, what people don't realize, and, a lot of times I don't realize, like, takes me a while to remember this. And it's things like Vets for Gun Reform that remind me of this, is that the American military is representative of the American public.
Right.
There are conservatives, there are liberals, there are, you name every stripe, men, women, race, religion is in the military, serving now in the military or has served in the military. And, sometimes I think, being good liberals, we don't want to rock the boat and we don't want to upset people. So we just stay a little quiet. But at a certain point, and I think that's what we came to, with Warax or the rest of the group that sort of came together with Vets for Gun Reform, it says, no, we're not going to be quiet anymore. We're going to stand up and say, look, there's not a small minority not a small population that feels differently, that feels that this country is in a bad place, especially when it comes around to guns. And the thing is, as I will say, is that it's not even strictly a left-right, a liberal conservative thing. We saw Congressman Brian Mast. He's a Republican. He's a veteran. He lost both his legs in combat. He is an NRA member, took NRA donations for his campaign. A sitting Republican congressman said AR-15s are weapons of war and shouldn't be on the streets. You wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post that called for a ban on assault weapons. This is a sitting Republican congressman from a pretty red district. And the fact is that, if you read his piece, and I suggest all of you do, it really tells you this isn't a right-left thing. He said, as a veteran, I see what these do. I see what these weapons are, and they're weapons of war. Right. And it brings us together because we have this shared experience of we know what these weapons are. And it's not like, the NRA will go on their videos all day long and say, we don't know about guns, and all people we just hate guns and don't know anything about them. But here we are, the people who know these guns inside and out. I literally slept, showered, everywhere I went in Iraq and Afghanistan. My M4 was not an arm's length away from me. I know these weapons, just like Brian Mast does, just like the Warax does, like what all these veterans are saying is that, look, these weapons are meant to kill a lot of people really quickly. Right. And they do it. We saw it in Parkland, a couple weeks ago, and we've seen it in Sandy Hook, and we've seen it around the country. And we've just got to say, at a certain point, you just have to say stop. And as much as I don't want to be that liberal veteran, as some of my Facebook friends will tell me that I'm just, that token liberal veteran, I'm not just the one. There's lots of us out there, and I've seen it on Twitter. Literally hundreds of veterans, thousands, I don't know, I can't keep count, but they just keep everybody from Vietnam vets to guys who are serving right now saying, look, enough is enough.
What are some specific policies that you think would be helpful in trying to decrease gun violence in America today?
So specific policies are definitely something that I try to stay away from. My view on that is that my expertise is not law. My expertise is not public policy, and I don't have any interest. Particularly, I have no interest in getting in a position where I'm sitting across the table from somebody who's getting paid $1 million a year by the NRA to know those things and be able to debate point for point over policy and know studies. That's not my world. The world that I'm from is one where I carried a rifle everywhere I went. I had a pistol on my hip everywhere I went. And I've seen what these things do to people. My expertise is weapons. And my expertise also, that I think all of us share, is that I'm a human. And I can look at murdered children on television, and I can look into the eyes of their parents who are crying, knowing that they'll never hold their children again, and feel it. My expertise is that I'm a person who has empathy for people who suffer and is strong enough to stand up and say no, that these things should not be happening anymore. And that if the price that we pay for a child being able to go home from school to be with their parents at the end of the day is that it's a little bit tougher for us to have guns, then that's okay with me. I'm more than willing to pay that price.
Well, I'm more of a policy guy. I work up on Capitol Hill now, so I get a little more into the sort of the weeds on policy stuff. But I'm not by no means a gun policy expert. I'm not writing legislation on it. The thing is that there are some basic things that nobody's in disagreement with. You talk about universal background checks, and I think it's Quinnipiac poll. I may be mistaken. Whatever the poll is, 97% of Americans agree on it. How that is not policy, I don't understand. Well, I do understand.
Yeah, I understand.
Because I'm cynical and know how
money. Money is the reason why we don't have
DC
laws.
swamp works. But something like universal background checks.